DestinationMarc.
Hey guys, how's it going? Marcelo here, and while discussions on the topic of a new Spyro game are still going strong, one of the debates I've been made aware of is the topic of difficulty, and whether or not Spyro should ramp it up for the next game. There are those who are for and those who are against it, but from what I've seen, as I myself am for the difficulty bump, it seems that particular opinion is being misconstrued to insinuate that the next Spyro installment should adjust its difficulty in comparison to past games of the series, similarly to how Crash's latest installment did it in comparison to his series, aka Make Spyro Hard Like Crash, and with that in mind, I want to throw my hat into the ring of this discussion. First of all, I want to clarify, more so for myself as I don't typically speak for the majority, that when I personally say I like to see a more difficult Spyro game, I do not mean it should be as hard as Crash 4. What I would like to see is Spyro take a more straightforward approach to its exploration and level design like Spyro 1, and like how Crash 4 did it, expand on Spyro's moveset and build the worlds, levels, and challenges around what he can do. But before we can properly dive into that, we should first analyze how Spyro has handled its difficulty and learning curves in the past. And since everyone's still insisting on calling this next game Spyro 4, let's stick with the classic trilogy, or in this case, Reignited. Spyro 1 was a very basic and, again, straightforward game. You weren't helping NPCs or doing tasks for main characters or piloting vehicles, you were saving dragons, collecting treasure, and catching thieves to retrieve stolen eggs. It was a brilliantly simple concept, but the challenge came from how you got around the world. Spyro's flame breathing and gliding were tested. You had levels that were ground level with some verticality, and enemies that taught you to either flame or charge them, and then later levels grew more expansive. Enemies had gimmicks like needing to be knocked off a ledge or hit with super flame to defeat them. There were more bottomless pits, so you had to master Spyro's glide and understand the little things like initiating your glide at the apex of Spyro's jump, which some dragons do explain to you.
Did you know that you get your longest glides by pressing the jump button at the very top of your jump?
And of course, it's no secret that the Spyro games have always been the more relaxed platformers when compared to Crash's faster-paced jump-heavy escapades. This is kind of the reason why I'm making this video. But where it starts to feel like the classic games were really giving it to you easy is when you realize that dying and getting game overs didn't really penalize you. You just got booted back to the last checkpoint you touched, or to the start of the homeworld respectively, and the quote-unquote challenge was getting back to where you died. Now you're probably thinking, well, if you're gonna say that the difficulty should come from losing all your collectibles and having to gather them all up again, that'd just be time-consuming and aggravating. And you'd be right. Games like the original version of Banjo did that, and it doesn't look like much fun, but there might be another way to fix that. What I like about Crash 4, which alleviated this, is it took a more modern approach, and became the first Crash game that allowed you to play entirely without lives. This way you can learn the levels and keep trying to conquer the bits that were giving you trouble without the hindrance of getting booted back to the hub world. However, for the collectathon fanatics who wanted to gather the gems, there's a gem for dying less than 3 times. So that was your incentive for really striving to master the level and get through it with as few deaths as possible. It's not that you'd lose all your collected goods, it's that you were at risk of losing one of the major collectibles needed to perfect the level. Now for Spyro, the requirements don't have to be as strict, but this principle can still be implemented, albeit in a different way. Crash's death penalty makes sense for the type of platformer Crash is, a linear, compacted level-to-level experience. While Spyro is also level-to-level, the wider environments and constant backtracking would make this type of penalty a little too tedious. So why don't we come up with a different way to urge players to learn the level all the way to the end, or risk losing their collectibles? This can be achieved in 2 easy ways: making collectibles respawn if you die before getting to the next checkpoint, and getting rid of the exit level option. I'm aware it's a classic speedrunner tactic, as you get to keep everything when you use this option, but if we're trying to make understanding Spyro's level design a bit more of a necessity this time around, exit levels should be revoked, or at the very least you shouldn't get to keep anything you've picked up if you select it. This method of being prompted to get to the end of the level should sound familiar, as you have to do it in both Nork Nexus levels in Spyro 1. It's the only way to progress in that world. Make the whole game like that, and you'll be tasked with better learning and paying attention to how intricately Spyro's levels are designed. Especially for this hypothetical new game, in which we want to challenge players a bit more with the level design. And as for gems and collectibles, there will no doubt be multiple things to nab as there usually are in the OG trilogy, but instead of being able to keep everything for the entire game the moment you grab it, regardless of dying or getting game overs, why not make the player work for the right to keep their goods and only respawn the gems and such that you've collected in between checkpoints? It kinda goes against what I said earlier when bringing up Banjo, but I feel doing it this way might be much more manageable. But that's not all. If you really want to give the end portals some use, why not give them the Spyro 1 look again, and implement what the Spyro 1 beta was going to do and throw some gems in there? Now if you want every gem in the level, you'll need to exit the level through the portal, the way it was originally intended to be. And now we come to the gameplay. How can the level design of a new Spyro game complement Spyro's moveset the way Crash 4's levels do for Crash in the game? Well, in a much similar fashion really. Certain levels and mini challenges in Crash 4 urge you to think outside the box. Consider every facet of the Bandicoot's moveset. Want this hidden gem? Slide under these crates using the mid-air hang time, and then jump around and on top of them to get up there. Now again, Spyro shouldn't have to go that specific or ask that much, but I think there can still be challenges and context-sensitive actions you can perform to further interact with the worlds and dispatch enemies like you can never do before. Enemies are everything in Spyro. The series prides itself on introducing dozens of them and teaching you, or sometimes outright telling you, how to defeat them.
Their metal armor is fireproof, but a charge attack will take care of them.
Big enemies like this Nork with the club cannot be charged, but a quick flame, that should defeat them.
Now instead of being told, let's try teaching through actions. If the Spyro game's being built to feel like the classics but expanded on, like how Crash 4 was, then likewise, this Spyro game should treat the player as if they already know how to play a Spyro game. Instead of Hunter or someone else teaching you how to glide, implement some Spyro 1 stuff like hills and tall platforms that show you how to control Spyro's jumping and gliding. As for the enemies, it's always been easy to tell which of your two attacks will hurt them by trying each one out on them, so we don't need to be told that. Give us a shirtless Snork dude, a metal armor wearing one, and a big bumbling one side by side or in a group of 3, like Spyro 1 did, and let us experiment without a tutorial, lest you become like the previous Spyro 4. And after the basics are doled out, it's time to go in depth. Give us layers to how we can use these two attacks to defeat enemies. Going back to the prototype of Spyro 1, Blowhard's enemies originally had special hats that needed to be knocked off before you could properly take them out. I'd like to see stuff like that return and be more thoroughly fleshed out. I'd also like to see abilities with the elemental breaths come back, but allow us to solve problems and complete puzzles with them, not just electrify some rods or free some enemies without a second thought like past games have presented to us. Make some new baddies that need a specific element to be killed, introduce a new kind of armor for bad guys to wear that Spyro will need to take out with Super Flame or something. Make us fluctuate between flaming and charging into certain sweet spots to take guys out. Find ways to implement invincibility, supercharge, and the other abilities in bigger, creative ways. If speedways are going to return, make it so you can only keep everything if you've done all in one, as opposed to keeping gems after each set has been completed. If minigames are also going to return, make them more focused on honing Spyro's platforming skills rather than bumpy, tedious vehicle or beat-em-up segments. Again, Crash 4 only had one vehicle and 2 mounts in the whole game because the core of the experience was getting through each level solely on your platforming skills. And to a degree, I feel Spyro needs to go the same route. Now at this point, with how many times I've mentioned Crash 4, you may be wondering to yourself, well, didn't you say you don't want Spyro to be like Crash? Why are you comparing the two so much? And that's because that's still the truth, kinda. Here's the TLDR. I want the next Spyro game to not be hard like Crash 4, but I want the next Spyro game to be as challenging as Crash 4. And there is a difference. The levels are built around Crash's moveset, and like I said earlier, the core of Crash 4's experience is learning each character's movesets so you can master each level, and there's some legitimately good challenge to that. I feel this could be passed down to Spyro so we can think a little bit more about what we're doing. We're not having characters hold our hands, or jumping over a few platforms to go press a button, or mashing buttons to beat up a Yeti. I want to see a Spyro game that takes full advantage of what Spyro can do. He's got horns, give him cool horn power-ups. He's got wings and has only ever used them for gliding. Give him wing power-ups so he can guard or slice things. These ideas could be situational like the Quantum Masks, but in a more open world-esque environment, these would be really cool to mess around with, and could complement some damn good, intuitive world building. Also, he's got a roll! Remember the roll? Use that for something more. I don't know what or how, just do it. Where Crash 4 went too far with the difficulty was in the values. Watching the numbers of your collectibles go up to their highest cap for maximum completion with like no real bonuses. And levels that sometimes felt a little too unfairly challenging. What a new Spyro game should do in my opinion is learn from that, take the level design philosophies rather than the completion and requirement philosophies, and implement them into Spyro's existing classic formula. Soup up the baddies, make dying matter, use Spyro's moves and powers to their fullest extent, build the worlds and levels more elaborately around said moves and powers, and balance out how that can make a much more tougher yet fair and brand new Spyro experience. So, what do you guys make of this opinion? Are you for or against anything of this sort being implemented into the next Spyro game to bring a bit more depth and challenge? Whatever your thoughts are, leave them in the comments down below. I'm Mark, I will see you guys later. As always, thanks for watching, and take care.